Okay, so we have lesson 13 video notes for red groups. And for number 1, we're going to place the following fractions on the number line. So let's look at our first one would be 4/3. But you're like, uh-oh, how am I supposed to plot that? Because that's a weird fraction. So we'll have to make it into a mixed fraction by using number bonds. So our first number bond would be to make 4/3, we have 3/3, which equals 1, and 1/3, because 1/3 plus 3/3 is 4/3. So now we know that this fraction is greater than 1, so it will be going up here. So if we split right in between these 2 points, if we split them into 3s to make it into thirds, about here and here would be where our lines would be. So our 4/3, so our mixed fraction would look like this. Like this is called a mixed fraction right here. This 1 and 1/2. Oh, we're blurry. This 1 and 1/2 is called a mixed fraction. And that's where we're doing the same thing over here. So this was 1 and 1/3. So 1 and 1/3 would be plotted right one and 1/3 would be plotted right about here. So you can either, I'll write 4/3 up here and I'll write 1 and 1/3 down here. But that equals the same fraction. So now we'll go ahead and do this one. 11/6. And how we're going to plot this one is we are going to make this find out what number bonds this represents. So 11/6 has 6/6, and then how many more to get to 11 would be 5, and 5/6. So our mixed fraction would be 1 and 5/6. And then we plot that point, 1 and 5/6. And we are going to go ahead and plot that point in 1 and 5/6. So it is more than 1 and 1/2 for sure. So we're going to plot it somewhere in this area. And the way you can do that is split that into sixths and plot it on the 5 out of 6. So it would be closer to the 2. We'll go right about here. And again, I'll write 11/6 on top and 1 and 5/6 on the bottom. Just so you know that this is the same point. Now we'll do the same thing with this 17/12. We'll figure out what that is. With our number bonds, so there's 12, there is a 1 in there, and then to make that 17, there's 5 more, so 5/12. So our mixed fraction would be 1 and 5/12. Now I know this is less than a half because half of 12 is 6. And if this was 1 and 1/2, it would be a 6 up here. So I know it's right before the 1 and 1/2, which means it'll be right about here. And I will write 17/12 and 1 and 5/12 as well. All right, now we'll move on to number 2. Use the number line in problem 1, so up here, to compare the fractions by writing greater than, less than, or equal to on the lines. So this one we're just finding out which fraction comes first on the line, and whichever one comes first is less than the other one. So 1 and 5/5, or 1 and 5/6 is down here, and 1 and 5/12 is here, which means that 1 and 5/5 would be greater. Now on 1 and 1/3, we're here on that one, and then our 1 and 5/12 would be here, which means that 1 and 5/12 is greater. Okay. Place the following fractions on the number line given. So here we're going to do that same thing. We have 11/8, so out of that we can get 8/8. And then how many more to make 11 would be 3, so 3/8. So 1 and 3/8 would be your mixed number. And again, I know that this would be less than 1 and 1/2, but more than 1, because it's telling us it's more than 1 with that mixed number. But if this were to be 1 and 1/2, this top number would have to be a 4, which is half of 8. So that will go a little bit before. We will go a little bit before the 1 and 1/2, so we'll go right in the middle here. And we will go up on top. We will write our mixed number, or improper fraction like we have been doing, and on the bottom we will write that mixed number, 1 and 3/8. Now our B is 7/4. So we'll do our number bond again, except I'm going to do it a little backwards. We have 4/4, and how many more to get 7 would be 3/4. So now we have 1 and 3/4. We know that's bigger than 1 and 1/2. 1 and 3/4 would be right about here. Alright, so we'll do our improper fraction on the top, 7/4, and our mixed number on that bottom, 1 and 3/4. Now our last one is 15/12. And for that one, our number bond, to figure out what our fraction will be, you definitely have 12/12. And how many more to get to 15? 3. So it would be 3/12. So 1 and 3/12. And that one, we know that this isn't 1 and 1/2 because that would make it a 6 if it were 1 and 1/2. So we know we're going before this. We know we're going before this 1 and 1/2 right here. And I know we're going in front of this as well. So we'll go here. At this line is 1 and 3/12. And it's also 15/12. Alright, number 4, use the number line in problem 3 to explain the reasoning you used when determining whether 11/8 or 15/12 is greater. So here we have our 11/8 was here and our 15/12 is here. And I know that because when I found where 11/8 and 15/12 were on the number line, (11/8) is to the right, which means on this side, that way, of 15/12. So I know that 11/8 is greater. There you go. Move on to the next page. Alright, compare the fractions given below by writing greater than or less than on the lines. Give a brief explanation for each answer referring to benchmarks. Benchmarks would be things like 1/2, 1, 0, things like that. So, is 3/8 or 7/12 better? Greater. Which one is greater? Now I know that 3/8 is less than 1/2 because 1/2 would be 1/2 of 8 is 4. So that's not quite a half yet. But I do know this is greater than 1/2 because 1/2 of 12 is 6 and our numerator is a 7. So I am going to be saying that 3/8 is less than 7/12. Then my little explanations is 3/8 is 1/8 less than 1/2. And 7/12 is 1/12 more than 1/2. All right, now B, we're moving over, not going down. Our B is we have 5/12 and 7/8. And 5/12 is less than 1/2, but 7/8 is almost 1, which means 5/12 is less than 7/8. Maybe it just got really blurry. Okay, and then I'll just write exactly what I said. 5/12 is less than 1/2. And 7/8 is 1/8 away from 1. Okay, now C, we're moving down. We have 8/6 and 11/12. And 8/6, if you notice, it's greater than 1 because we have more on the top. But this one is not quite 1. 11/12 is not quite 1. So 8/6 is greater than 1. And then 11/12 is less than 1. Okay, and D, 5/12 and 1/3. And 5/12 is really close to 1/2. So, and that one is less than 1/2. So 5/12 is greater. 5/12 is closer to 1/2. Now move down to E. We have 7/5 and 11/10, which are both greater than 1. They're both greater than 1, obviously. But this one's only 1/10 over 1, where this is 2/5 over 1. So 7/5 would be greater. And you could write 11/10 is closer to 1. Moving over to F, we have 5/4 and 7/8. This one, if you notice, is greater than 1, and this one is less than 1, which means 5/4 is greater. And then we could write 5/4 is greater than 1, and 7/8 is less than 1. Now we are on to G. (13/12) is greater than 1, and 9/10 is less than 1. So 13/12 would be greater. 5/4 is greater than 1, and 6/8 is less than 1. 8/12 is less than 1, but more than 1/2, and then 8/4 is greater than 1. In J, we have 7/5 and 16/10, which are both greater than 1. But this one, 7/5 is less than 1 1/2, or 16/10